Good evening and welcome to your punctibyte for the week of January 24th. And the first punctibyte that Rachel is somewhat delirious for after driving for 6 hours home from a ski race. Ski race was great, and the fun news is that actually the two skiers that are currently taking microbiology sat right with me on the way home and actually were completing their microbiology homework, so we got to dork out a bit about microbiology. And one of the things we talked about was antibiotic resistance, and so I thought it was perfectly fitting that I should come home and see that on my Twitter feed 8 minutes ago exactly, probably 9 now, but there was actually an article tweeted from Wired Science, and somebody can go and check on the original source because obviously this is wired.com, and I'm a little wired.com, and so I wanted to just briefly talk about this study, and maybe somebody can check up on the original one in infection control and hospital epidemiology. But essentially they're looking at the proximity of individuals living close to a confined animal feeding operation, so a CAFO, that is particularly for pigs, and they found that in fact those people living near or in close proximity to that facility were 2.76 times higher, more likely to have MRSA, more likely to be carrying MRSA than those that did not live near the CAFO. So I thought, interesting, gets me kind of wired. I don't know about you guys, but let's talk lab, and let's begin by talking schedule. To start out with, just a reminder that most of us are doing labs 2 and 3 this week. However, Spurlock and Aaron, you guys are going to run ahead of us going on to lab 4, so you get to do a little bit of extra staining action going on to the capsule and endospore stains. So you guys will actually finish up your staining, and that means that your students, when they hit Thursday, should be able to identify their unknowns at least at the level of the genus. You'll have to help them and give them the name of the species. Make sure that you do that before they leave so that they can do a rad unknown press release. Also, remember to tell them that there are examples of this press release posted online to help them out maybe with understanding what we mean by a creative press release. Couple of other notes, I will be gone this Friday for Open Labs, so that means that Joe has graciously agreed to cover that particular Open Lab for us, but it means that John and Bailey, you guys are going to need to be right on top of your game, and I'm actually hoping you'll be like way more on top of your game than I was this last Open Lab because I forgot to have students sign in that were making up the lab. So if you had a student that was supposed to be making up the lab this last Open Lab, please do chat with them because there were at least 3 or 4 students there making up lab, and I failed to have them sign in. So just ask and they'll tell you whether they were there for Open Lab. That being said, do note that for most of the rest of the TAs besides Aaron and Aaron, we will be going on, the furthest that we'll get this week is Lab 3. And do note that this is the first lab for which you all are completely responsible for the lecture. That means that you need to remember to sign up and claim that lecture so that we're not uncertain as to who will be delivering the lecture for that day. I will do lab 2, and unfortunately I didn't get the flipped classroom going on, so I'll just be delivering that lecture during lab. Let's go ahead and take a look at the TA guidelines briefly for Lab 2 because we did already go through these a little bit in the last punctibyte, but I just wanted to make a reminder that we will begin by doing the negative stain smear. So one of the things that amongst all of the TAs you will need to decide who is feeling good about giving the demo of making a smear, and that smear is the negative stain smear, meaning 2 circles of Congo red. You'll be resuspending some Bacillus subtilis in one of those circles and the tooth scraping in the other circle. You'll want to be able to demo that. We're going to let that dry while I do the lecture. Then from there, we're going to move along and show them how to finish that stain. So that will allow you to demo smear preparation at the same time as you also demo oil immersion. So you can show them after the lecture is over how to go to oil and how to see bacteria that obviously are too small to be seen on the 40x lens for the most part. Preparing the smear is perhaps the most important skill that the students will gain on this day, and so it's really important to talk to them about making light smears, smears that will enable us to see individual bacterial cells, arrangement, shape, and whatnot, morphology overall. Wonderful. I think that summarizes much of what we'll be doing in Lab 2, and I'm going to bring up the Lab 3 TA guidelines. And remember that this is by far the most important of the staining labs because we'll be covering the gram stain. Please do not forget to assign the gram stain report and make sure that you let your students know when that will be due. And I just had the thought that we should probably point that out on the calendar. So here, let me bring the calendar back up. And let's just find the reasonable due date. So Lab 3 is on either Wednesday or Thursday. And do note that we have a lecture exam on Tuesday the 4th. So I still think, though, that it's reasonable for the gram stain to be due on the 6th, Thursday the 6th for my Gen Micro students. That would mean either the 5th or the 6th for the Med Micro students. So that's what we'll be looking at as far as due dates go, for just letting your students know that. So returning back to the Lab 3 TA guidelines, a couple of things. The lecture portion of this particular lab is incredibly important. Do not assume that the students have already been exposed to gram-positive and gram-negative cells. Largely, that will depend upon how much progress I'm able to make in lecture. Sometimes I make it and sometimes I don't. With Med Micro, I just don't like to assume anything. Even though I know they've gotten a lot of the information, go ahead in with a full idea of how you're going to present. Use models and really teach them the gram-positive and gram-negative cell wall structure. You don't need to be ad nauseum with your description, but you need to be clear and really show them the highlighting features that differentiate gram-positive from gram-negative. So really spend some time on those pictures and make sure you're pointing out the critical features of the two different kinds of cell walls. We also want to clearly teach them how to do the really delicate decolorization process, so it's important to emphasize that particular step in the gram staining procedure. We'll also be doing acid-fast stain, important in this particular case to differentiate between acid-fast and gram stain. Sometimes the students get confused and think these two are related, but really they're two different stains. One of the neat things that we did last semester was to actually draw what an acid-fast cell wall looked like, and then it helped us to differentiate, and I thought that was a really good move. So maybe we'll do that again this semester. Let's just go briefly on to Lab 4 because this will be the one that Erin and Aaron are doing on Thursday. The rest of us will wait this one until next week. But in terms of this lab, make sure that you have them start with their capsule smear first. It helps a lot if it dries. Get just a single loopful onto the smear and set that aside. Doesn't take very long, but if it dries during the lecture, then you're going to find you're going to get supreme results. You're going to love it. So that's what we'll want to do with the capsule stain. The endospore stain needs to be a little bit thicker than what they're used to doing. And we want to spend a little bit of time talking about endospores. I don't devote much lecture time to endospores, so this is their exposure, at least with Gen Micro students, to the details of the endospore, the process of sporulation, and the process of germination or activation and germination as those endospores find themselves in a nice environment once again. Capsules, again, I do talk a little bit about that in lecture, but I don't talk a lot about it, so you'll want to hit on that. We talk about glycocalyces as a broad concept, and this lecture talks a little bit more about them in a succinct way. I just realized that I literally spelled vomiting wrong. So if you want to change the spelling of that, I'm trying to think. Extra M, extra T. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like vomiting after this long of a trip, so I don't really know how that's spelled. Email me if you know. Okay, so recognize then we're going to do most of us labs 2 and 3, and to summarize, Erin and Aaron will be the only ones moving on to lab 4. Everybody wants to start thinking about the dilution problems that are up and coming and getting students ready for lab 5. Otherwise, I think we're totally ready to rage, as we might say in the ski world, so I'll see you guys soon.